You are in danger. Do not turn around. Just smile and hug me like I'm your dad. A rough voice whispered, sounding like a Hell's Angel who had gargled gravel. What happened in the next 5 minutes didn't just scare me. It shocked me to my very core and changed my life forever. Emily tugged her beige trench coat tighter against the biting chill as she hurried down Holloway Avenue. The October wind wasn't just cold. It carried the crisp, decaying scent of wet leaves and the faint, acrid smell of a distant chimney fire. Her boots struck the pavement with a rhythmic clack clack clack, a lonely, hollow sound that bounced off the red brick buildings and seemed to amplify the silence of the empty street. She instantly regretted turning down her shift manager, Brenda's, offer for a lift. Under the buzzing street lamps, pools of sickly yellow light stretched across the sidewalk, distorting her shadow into something long and unnatural. A discarded newspaper tumbled across the asphalt like a tumbleweed in a ghost town, the only thing moving besides her. Emily fished her phone out of her pocket. 10:48 p.m. 3 missed texts from her mother, Martha. She could almost picture Martha pacing the living room rug, parting the curtains every 30 seconds to peer into the dark. I'm 24, not 12, Emily muttered, rolling her eyes, though a pang of guilt pricked her chest. Martha's heart was in the right place, but her hovering was suffocating like a wool blanket in summer. Just yesterday, Martha had grilled her for 20 minutes about a lunch date. Where? With whom? Did you check the parking lot lights? It was draining. Before we dive deeper into this night of terror, I'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Let me know in the comments. Now, back to the nightmare on Holloway Avenue. This job at the cafe was supposed to be Emily's declaration of independence. She'd snagged the interview without Martha's help, landed the gig, and finally had her own cash flow. But independence came with a tax, strict curfews disguised as safety checks and an endless stream of "Are you okay?" emojis. A sedan rolled past slowly, its headlights sweeping over the darkened storefronts like searchlights. Emily's grip on her phone tightened, her knuckles turning white as Martha's lectures about predators in the night replayed in her head. The sound of her boots felt deafening now. I could have moved to the city, she thought, remembering the acceptance letter to the state university she'd hidden in her drawer. Staying at the local community college had made Martha cry with relief. 2 years later, Emily wondered if that relief was actually a cage. The wind picked up, rattling the skeletal branches of the oaks lining the street. The crosswalk signal clicked from white to orange to red, holding her at the corner of an empty intersection. Emily crossed her arms, shivering. Her apartment building, her sanctuary, was only 3 blocks away. Somewhere nearby, a stray dog barked aggressively, making her flinch. Emily let out a nervous chuckle, shaking her head at her own jitteriness. But the laugh died in her throat. Behind her, footsteps. Not the chaotic scuffing of a sneaker, but the heavy, deliberate thud of heavy boots on concrete. Steady. Purposeful. Hunting. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. Don't panic, she commanded her brain. Just keep walking. Be normal. But her legs felt like they were wading through molasses. The steps behind her sped up. The distance was closing. Emily's hand dove into her purse, fingers scrabbling for her pepper spray. Her trembling fingertips grazed the cold metal canister, but in her panic, she fumbled. It slipped from her grasp, hitting the sidewalk with a metallic clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. As she instinctively bent to grab it, a massive shadow engulfed her own. Emily froze. She looked up, and her breath hitched. Standing over her was a man who looked like he could block out the sun. He wore a worn leather jacket adorned with faded patches, his face mostly obscured by a thick, unruly beard. In the dim streetlight, his eyes locked onto hers with a terrifying intensity. She opened her mouth to scream, to run, to do something, but he stepped in too close. You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad. The command was low, urgent, and carried a weird mix of iron authority and terrifying gentleness. Emily stood paralyzed, her hand hovering inches from the fallen spray. The man's eyes didn't hold the malice she expected. Instead, beneath the intimidation, there was something that looked shockingly like fear. For her, the stranger's words hung in the frigid night air like a cloud of condensation, refusing to dissipate. Emily's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure panic, as she stared up at the mountain of a man blocking her path. His weathered face, etched with deep lines of a hard life, And that worn leather jacket marked him as exactly the kind of trouble Mother had spent 20 years warning her about. But then there were his eyes. Amidst the rough exterior and the intimidating beard, there was an urgent sincerity that made her pause. It wasn't the look of a predator. It was the look of a desperate sentry. "What? Who are you?" Emily's voice quivered, betraying the confidence she tried so hard to feign. She took a small, calculated step backward, her fingers clutching her phone so tightly she thought the screen might crack. No time to explain, his voice was low, a gravelly rumble that vibrated in the air between them, but it wasn't threatening. "Just walk with me. Act natural." He gestured forward with a sharp, commanding nod. Emily's mind raced through a catalogue of terrible options. Run into the dark alley. Scream for help on an empty street. Call the police? But something in the man's demeanor, the way his eyes kept darting to scan the perimeter, how he subtly shifted his weight to position himself between her and the open road felt instinctively protective rather than predatory. Against every survival instinct screaming in her brain, she fell into step beside him. He matched her pace with practiced ease, his heavy boots hitting the pavement in sync with her own. The streetlights cast their joined shadows across the cracked concrete, his shadow tall, broad, and imposing, hers small and hesitant beside it. "My name's Silas," he said quietly, keeping his gaze fixed forward like a soldier on patrol. "Just keep walking. If anyone looks our way, smile. Act like we're discussing the weather or your grades." Emily tried to steady her breathing, which was coming in short, sharp gasps. "Why should I trust you?" "Because right now, I'm the only one who knows what's coming." His words sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. They walked another half-block in a tense silence that felt heavier than lead. Emily noticed how Silas kept himself positioned as a human shield between her and the street, his broad shoulders creating a barrier that felt oddly reassuring despite her fear. His presence was commanding but controlled, like a guard dog that knew exactly when to bite and when to heel. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the aggressive roar of engine. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows tore around the corner, its tires squealing against the asphalt like a dying animal. Emily jumped, her breath catching in her throat, but Silas remained as steady as a statue beside her. The car screeched to a halt 20 feet ahead of them, blocking their path, its angry red brake lights painting the street in the color of blood. Two men emerged from the vehicle. One was tall and wiry, moving with a fluid grace. The other was shorter but built like a tank. Both wore dark clothes and carried themselves with an aggressive swagger that made Emily's stomach clench into a knot. "Well, well," the taller one called out, his voice dripping with a false friendliness that made Emily's skin crawl. "Look who it is." Silas's posture shifted subtly. He didn't move away from Emily. Instead, he seemed to expand, taking up more space. She could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. His rough hand brushed her elbow, a silent cue gently guiding her slightly behind him. "Evening, boys," Silas replied. His voice was calm, casual even, but carrying an edge of cold steel. "Nice night for a drive." The shorter man took a step forward, his boots scraping menacingly against the concrete. "Didn't expect to see you in this neighborhood, old man." "Just taking my daughter home," Silas lied smoothly. The falsehood rolled off his tongue with such practiced ease that for a split second, even Emily almost believed it. "You know how it is, can't be too careful these days. Lots of weirdos out." The two men exchanged dark looks. Emily held her breath, feeling the crushing weight of unspoken threats hanging in the air. She realized these weren't random thugs, they were part of something organized, a gang perhaps, or something worse. The taller man's hand twitched toward the inside of his jacket, a movement that screamed weapon, but Silas's steady, lethal gaze never wavered. He stared them down with the intensity of an enforcer who had seen it all. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, the shorter man backed away, spitting on the ground. "Another time then," he sneered, his words carrying a promise of future violence. They returned to their car, the engine growling back to life. The sedan pulled away slowly, cruising past them like a shark, before its taillights disappeared around the corner. Emily realized she was trembling violently, her knees weak with a mixture of relief and lingering panic. She looked up at Silas, who was still watching the empty street, a dark shadow falling over his face. Emily jolted awake to the shrill, demanding ring of her smartphone. Slices of harsh morning sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and creating geometric patterns on her rumpled sheets. Her mother's name flashed on the screen like a warning beacon. She answered with a groggy, gravelly voice. "Hello? Emily? Are you okay?" Martha's voice crackled through the speaker, tight with a frequency of worry that set Emily's teeth on edge. Emily sat up, rubbing the sleep and the lingering nightmare from her eyes. "Yeah, Mom. I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? I had a feeling." Martha's breath hitched audibly. Did anything unusual happen last night? The memory of Silas, the black sedan, and the terrifying standoff flooded back into Emily's mind with the force of a tidal wave. Her hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. Should she tell her? If she mentioned the gang members or the strange enforcer, Martha would lock her in the house until she was 40. She would become even more suffocating, more controlling. "Nothing happened, Mom. Just the usual walk home from work." The lie felt heavy and oily on her tongue, leaving a bad taste. "Are you sure? Because I could drive you to work from now on. Or maybe you could look for a job closer to home, maybe at the library." Martha's words tumbled out faster now, bordering on desperate. Emily swung her legs off the bed, frustration building in her chest like pressure in a boiler. "Mom, we've talked about this. I'm 24. I can handle walking a few blocks on Holloway Avenue. I'm not a child. I know. It's just." Martha paused, the silence heavy with unspoken fears. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." Emily ended the call and got ready for work, trying to shake off the lingering residue of her mother's anxiety. But something about Martha's tone nagged at her. It wasn't just her usual helicopter parenting. It was different today, more urgent, laced with a specific kind of dread. The morning air was crisp and biting as Emily walked to the grindhouse. Her boots clicked against the sidewalk, a rhythmic reminder of the previous night. She had almost convinced herself that the encounter with Silas was just a fever dream, a hallucination born of exhaustion, when a familiar figure stepped out from around the corner near the bakery. Silas stood there, looking slightly less intimidating in the daylight but still commanding attention like a monolith. His leather jacket was worn white at the seams, and his beard was neatly trimmed. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a weary soldier. "Morning," he said, falling into step beside her as if this was their established routine. Emily's steps faltered. "Are you following me? Just making sure you're safe." His eyes scanned the street, a hyper-vigilant habit she recognized from last night. "Your father would have wanted that." Emily stopped dead in her tracks, causing a passing jogger to swerve around her. "My father?" Her voice came out sharper than intended, slicing through the morning noise. "What do you know about my father?" Silas turned to face her, his hard expression softening into something unreadable. "I knew him pretty well, actually." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emily's father had died when she was a toddler. A car accident, Martha had always said. She had so few memories of him, just fragments, really. A warm laugh, strong hands lifting her up, the smell of peppermint and motor oil. "That's impossible," Emily said, taking a defensive step back. "You're lying." "I'm not," Silas replied quietly. "But this isn't the time or place to explain ancestry." Emily shook her head, her thoughts spinning like autumn leaves in a storm. "Stay away from me," she hissed, pushing past him toward the cafe. But even as she walked away, questions multiplied in her mind like echoes in a canyon. How did this stranger know her father? Why was he here now? And why did her mother sound so terrified this morning? That evening, Emily pushed her fork through the spaghetti on her plate, watching Martha carefully across their small, cozy kitchen table. The overhead light cast harsh shadows on Martha's face, emphasizing the new lines of worry around her eyes. Steam rose from their plates, filling the air with the familiar, comforting scent of garlic and oregano, but Emily had no appetite. "Mom," Emily began, setting her fork down with a deliberate clink. "Something weird happened today." Martha looked up, her movements slow and deliberate as she twirled pasta around her fork. "I ran into someone. A man named Silas." Emily watched her mother's hand freeze mid-motion. "He said he knew Dad." The fork clattered against Martha's ceramic plate, the sound jarring in the quiet kitchen. She quickly picked it up, wiping non-existent sauce from the tablecloth with trembling fingers. "There are lots of people who might have known your father, sweetie. He was a popular man. But this felt different. Emily leaned forward, scrutinizing her mother. He seemed to know things. Personal things. He acted like he was protective of me. Martha's shoulders tensed up toward her ears. What exactly did this man say? Not much. But then there's nothing to discuss. Martha cut her off, her voice sharp as broken glass. Your father knew many people through his work. This Silas person probably just crossed paths with him once or twice. Emily frowned. But Mom. Emily, please. Martha stood up abruptly, gathering her barely touched dinner. I don't want to talk about this. Some strange man makes a vague comment about knowing your father and suddenly you're ready to believe anything. It's dangerous. You're not even listening to me. Emily's voice rose. Why are you being so defensive? I'm not being defensive. Martha scraped her plate into the trash with more force than necessary. I'm being practical. We don't know this man, and I don't want you talking to strangers. It's not safe. I'm not a child anymore. Emily pushed back from the table, the legs of her chair screeching against the floor. Why won't you ever tell me anything about Dad? About your life before? About his blood relatives? Martha turned to face her, hands gripping the edge of the sink so hard her knuckles were white. Because the past is the past, Emily. Let it stay there. The conversation died after that, leaving an uncomfortable, suffocating silence hanging between them. Emily helped clean up without another word, the clink of dishes the only sound in their small kitchen. Later that evening, Emily padded down the hallway for a glass of water. Martha's voice drifted from the living room, low and urgent. I don't know what to do, Marie. Martha was on the phone, pacing near the window, her silhouette framed by the streetlights outside. He shouldn't be here. None of them should. Emily pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing, straining to hear. Of course, I haven't told her. Martha's whisper was fierce. What am I supposed to say? That everything she thinks she knows about her uncle. About us? She stopped abruptly. No, you're right. Some things are better left buried. A long pause. Emily held her breath. I thought we were safe here. Martha's voice cracked slightly. I thought we'd finally gotten away from all of that. But now. God, Marie, if she finds out. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. You're right, Martha said after a long moment. The past needs to stay in the past. I won't let it hurt my daughter. Not again. Emily retreated to her room, sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop balanced on her knees. The soft blue glow of the screen lit up her face in the dimness. Outside, crickets chirped their evening song, but she barely noticed, too focused on her digital excavation. There has to be something, she muttered, typing different combinations of her mother's maiden name and her father's name into the search bar. She'd been at it for hours, digging through old social media posts, digitized yearbooks and local news archives. Just as her eyes began to blur from staring at the pixels, something caught her attention. It was a link to an archived PDF of a community newspaper, an article about a local biker rally from 25 years ago. Emily clicked it, her heart beating faster as the page slowly loaded over the apartment's slow Wi-Fi. The black and white photograph was grainy, showing a large group of people gathered around their motorcycles. Emily squinted, leaning closer to the screen, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the middle of the crowd, stood a younger version of her mother. Martha's hair was longer then, flowing past her shoulders, wild and untamed. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a leather jacket. But what made Emily's hands shake was the man standing next to her mother. Silas. He looked younger, his beard less gray, but he was unmistakable with those broad shoulders and that intense expression, and on his other side stood a man who looked hauntingly like the few pictures Emily had of her father. Oh my God, Emily whispered, saving the photo to her phone. Her mother had lied to her face. They didn't just know each other. They had been friends. Or maybe more than that. They were a tribe, a brotherhood. Emily's mind raced with questions. Why would her mother hide this? What else wasn't she telling her? The Martha in the photo looked so different from the careful, controlling mother she knew. This Martha looked free. Wild. Dangerous. With trembling fingers, Emily pushed her laptop aside and got up. She found her mother in the living room, reading a book under the soft glow of the table lamp. The familiar scene, her mother in her favorite armchair, Reading glasses perched on her nose suddenly felt like a staged play, a lie constructed to hide the truth. "Mom," Emily said, her voice stronger than she expected. "We need to talk." Martha looked up, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. "What is it, honey?" Emily held up her phone, displaying the grainy old photograph. "Want to explain this?" The color drained from Martha's face, leaving her pale as a ghost. She set her book down slowly, deliberately, as if buying time. "Where did you find that?" "Online." Emily moved closer, her phone still extended like a weapon. "You told me you didn't know Silas. But here you are, standing right next to him. Wearing leather." Martha pressed her lips together, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Emily, that was a very long time ago. So, you admit you know him?" Emily's voice cracked with emotion. "Why did you lie to me?" Her mother's face hardened, a defensive wall slamming down behind her eyes. "Some things are better left in the past where they belong. That's not good enough." Emily's voice rose, echoing in the small room. "I deserve to know the truth. Who is he? How did you know him? What does this have to do with Dad? Was he his brother?" Martha stood up abruptly, her movement stiff and mechanical. "I'm not having this conversation." She walked toward the kitchen, her shoulders rigid. "Mom, please." Emily followed her. "You can't keep hiding things from me. I'm not a child anymore." But Martha had already shut down, busying herself with washing dishes that were already clean. Her back was turned to Emily, a physical barrier against the questions. The only sound was the running water and the quiet clink of plates. Her silence was a fortress. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, the photograph still glowing on her phone screen, feeling more alone than ever. Her mother's refusal to talk only confirmed what she already suspected. There was much more to this story than anyone was willing to tell her. And she was going to find out, no matter what. The brass bell above the door jingled sharply as Emily stepped into the grindhouse, a hole-in-the-wall coffee shop wedged uncomfortably between a noisy laundromat and a fading second-hand bookstore. The rich, bitter aroma of dark roast espresso hit her nostrils instantly, battling with the scent of old paper and dust. She scanned the dimly lit interior, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Morning sunlight filtered through the grime-streaked windows, casting long, hazy beams across the scarred wooden tables. She'd overheard two of the regulars at her own workplace mention that a scary biker type had been haunting this place for his morning caffeine fix. Her heart thumped a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of anxiety mixed with determination as she spotted him. Silas was sitting alone in a secluded corner booth, nursing a steaming mug. He looked like a boulder in a stream, immovable and ancient. He wore the same battered leather jacket as before, the patches faded but still visible, and his weathered face was partially hidden behind that thick, graying beard. Emily ordered a vanilla latte at the counter, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the change. While waiting for the barista to foam the milk, she gathered every scrap of courage she possessed. This was it. No more running. The barista called her name. Emily wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic cup, drawing strength from its heat like a battery, and marched toward the corner booth. Taking a deep, stabilizing breath, she approached Silas's table. He looked up, his dark eyes unreadable but surprisingly not unfriendly. He didn't look surprised. "I had a feeling you'd come looking for me sooner or later," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like tires rolling over loose stones. "May I?" Emily gestured to the cracked vinyl seat opposite him. "It's a free country." Silas nodded, pushing aside a half-eaten blueberry muffin. "Does your mother know you're here?" "No." Emily slid into the booth, placing her latte down with deliberate care. Mom's not exactly winning awards for transparency these days. A flicker of something, maybe sadness, maybe regret, crossed Silas's face. "Martha has always been protective of you. Fiercely so. Can't say I blame her, given the history." "I found an old photograph," Emily said, cutting to the chase. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it with a swipe, and slid it across the sticky table surface. "You, my dad, and my mom, at a rally." "She won't tell me a single thing about it." Silas stared at the glowing screen. His calloused fingers hovered over the glass, tracing the faces as if they were ghosts he could physically touch. "Different times," he murmured, his voice heavy. "Your mother was different back then. We all were. Young. Stupid. Invincible." "Please." Emily leaned forward. lowering her voice to a whisper to avoid the prying ears of the barista. I need to know the truth. How do you know my family? Was my dad, was he one of you? The morning crowd bustled around them, people grabbing to-go cups, laughing, living normal lives, but in their dusty corner, time seemed to coagulate. Silas took a long, slow sip of his black coffee, his eyes drifting to a place Emily couldn't see. Your mother's brother, Richie. Your uncle. He was my best friend, Silas finally said. The words came out heavy, like stones. We rode together in the gang, the Iron Kings. He was wild, fearless, everything I wanted to be back then. Martha got pulled into that orbit because of him. And because of your father, Richard. Emily's hands tightened around her cup until her knuckles turned white. My mom had a brother? She never told me. She never even whispered his name. Richie wasn't the kind of person Martha wants you looking up to. He was notorious in the life. An enforcer. He got mixed up in things. Debts? Territories. Things that eventually got him killed. Silas's voice dropped an octave, weighed down by the gravity of the past. After that, your mother cut ties with everyone. She scrubbed her life clean. Started fresh. Buried the leathers and the memories. Emily sat back, her mind reeling as she tried to process this avalanche of information. Her mother, the woman who fretted over expiration dates on milk and nagged Emily about wearing a scarf, had once been part of a biker gang's inner circle. It felt like finding out her dentist was a retired assassin. Why keep it a secret for 20 years? Emily asked. Why lie? She wanted to protect you from the blood and the violence, Silas said, meeting her eyes with that intense stare. Martha has carried this secret like a shield, thinking it would keep you safe from the sins of the past. Maybe she's right. Some ancestry is better left in the dark. But she lied about Dad, too, Emily pressed, remembering a specific detail Martha had used to explain her father's absences in old stories. She used to tell me Richard was seeing someone else, that he was distant because of an affair, to explain why he was gone at night. But he wasn't, was he? Silas shook his head slowly. No. Richard was seeing someone else, all right, but it wasn't a woman. He was meeting with the leadership, trying to negotiate a way out for all of us. He was loyal to a fault. That lie. It was easier for Martha to let you believe he was a cheater than to tell you he was a hero in a war you didn't know existed. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting Silas's face in sharp, unforgiving relief. In the harsh light, Emily could see the toll the years had taken on him, the scars, the gray hairs, the weight of secrets etched into the deep lines around his eyes. Emily opened her mouth to ask another question, to ask about the black sedan, but Silas held up a large, scarred hand. That's all I can tell you for now, kid. The rest needs to come from your mother. Emily's hands trembled violently as she jammed her key into the lock, the metal scraping against the brass plate before finally turning. The conversation with Silas at the coffee shop had left her mind spinning like a broken compass, and now she needed answers. Real answers. Not the sanitized bedtime stories she'd been fed for 2 decades. She found her mother in the kitchen, standing at the sink. Martha was methodically washing dishes, scrubbing a plate that was already clean with a fervor that bordered on manic. It was her tell the thing she always did when her anxiety was redlining. Mom, Emily said firmly, closing the door behind her with a definitive click. We need to talk about Silas. And we need to talk about the truth. Martha's shoulders stiffened as if she'd been struck. The plate she was washing slipped from her soapy fingers, sliding back into the water with a dull, defeated splash. There's nothing to talk about, she mumbled, staring into the gray, swirling water. But her voice wavered, lacking its usual steel. I know that's not true. Emily pulled out a kitchen chair, the legs scraping loudly against the linoleum. I just talked to him. He told me about Uncle Richie. He told me everything. Martha dried her hands slowly on a dish towel, her back still turned to her daughter. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the heavy silence, each second stretching out like a rubber band about to snap. Finally, she turned around. Emily was struck by how incredibly tired her mother looked, the mask of the perfect suburban mom cracking to reveal a terrified woman beneath. The weight of whatever she'd been carrying for 20 years seemed to be physically pressing her down into the floor. I never wanted you mixed up in any of this, Martha whispered, sinking into the chair across from Emily. Her hands twisted the damp dish towel nervously, turning her knuckles white. That world? It's not like the movies, Emily. It's ugly. It's dangerous. So incredibly dangerous. What world, Mom? Please, just tell me the truth for once. Martha took a deep, shaky breath that sounded like a rattle in her chest. Your Uncle Richie. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was involved with the Iron Kings. A gang. He was deep into it, deeper than anyone should go. And Silas. Silas was like his right-hand man. They were inseparable, like two halves of the same coin. But Silas said he protected us. Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He did. They both did. Martha's eyes drifted to the window, looking at something far away in the past. They protected me when things got rough. Protected us from rival territories, from law enforcement, from the darkness that follows that life. Protected you from what? People who wanted revenge. People who. Martha's voice cracked, a sob catching in her throat. There was always someone. Always some threat. Living like that, constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for a shadow to move, waiting for the phone to ring at 3 a.m. It does something to you. It eats away at your soul. Tears welled up in Martha's eyes, spilling over her lashes when Richie died, when they killed him. I knew I had to get out. I was paralyzed with panic. I had to keep you safe, Emily. Silas wanted to help, to keep watching over us, to be a protective force. But I couldn't let him. I couldn't let you grow up with that blood on your hands, with that violence hanging over your head. So, you ran? I cut all ties. Changed our names. Moved us 3 states away. Started fresh. Emily reached across the table and took her mother's trembling hand. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why let me believe Dad was just gone? How could I? Martha wiped her eyes with her free hand, smearing mascara on her cheek. You were so young. So innocent. I wanted you to have a normal life. Proms, college, coffee dates. A life without fear. Without. She gestured helplessly around the room. Without all of that darkness. Emily squeezed her mother's hand. But Mom, keeping all these secrets, it didn't protect me. It just left me in the dark. It left me unprepared when the shadow finally found us. Martha nodded slowly, tears now streaming freely down her face. I know that now. I was so scared of losing you the way I lost Richie. The way I lost your father to his grief. That I went too far. I tried too hard to keep you in a bubble. A sharp, authoritative knock at the front door made them both jump, their hearts skipping a beat. Emily stood up, wiping her own eyes. I'll get it. It's probably the mailman. Emily, wait, Martha started, panic flaring in her eyes, but Emily was already heading down the hallway. She opened the door, expecting a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, she found a man standing there. He was tall, with cold, dead eyes and gray hair tied back in a severe ponytail. Emily felt her stomach drop. She recognized him instantly. He was the tall, lean man from the black sedan, the one who had confronted Silas the night before. His presence on her doorstep made her skin crawl. He carried himself with an aggressive swagger, radiating a silent threat that filled the entryway. Emily, he said, his voice low and grating, like metal sliding on bone. He knew her name. I need you to listen carefully, little girl. Stay away from Silas. He's not the savior he pretends to be. His eyes flicked past her shoulder to Martha, who had appeared in the hallway, clutching her chest. Some of us haven't forgotten what happened to Richie, the man sneered, his gaze lingering on Martha with terrifying familiarity. And the Iron Kings never forgive a debt. Emily sat at her kitchen table long after her mother had retreated to her bedroom, the stranger's gravelly warning echoing in her mind on an endless, terrifying loop. Stay away from Silas if you know what's good for you. The words made her stomach twist into nauseous knots, a physical manifestation of the dread settling over the apartment. Martha had spent the entire evening pacing the floorboards, checking the deadbolts repeatedly and peering through the heavy drapes like a prisoner expecting an executioner. Promise me you won't see him again, she'd begged, her face pale and drawn with worry. You don't understand what these people are capable of, Emily. They are animals. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Silas was different. The way he'd protected her on the street, the genuine concern in his eyes, it didn't match the monster her mother described. She pulled out her phone, staring at the number Silas had scribbled on a napkin at the coffee shop. Her thumb hovered over the call button, trembling. The next morning, Emily's head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton from a lack of sleep. She tossed and turned all night, torn between her mother's paralyzed fear and her own burning need for the truth. Martha hovered around her more than usual, making flimsy excuses to call in sick to work. "Mom, you can't watch me every second," Emily finally snapped, frustration creeping into her voice as she grabbed her purse. "I'm not a child anymore. I have to live my life." "You don't know what you're dealing with," Martha insisted, wringing her hands until the knuckles cracked. "These people, the gang, they hold grudges for decades. They never forget, and they never forgive." But Emily had already made up her mind. During her lunch break at the grindhouse, she texted Silas to meet her at Wilson's Point, a quiet, industrial overlook above the old marina where rusted fishing boats bobbed in the oil-slicked water. It was public enough to feel safe, but private enough for the conversation she needed to have. Silas was already there when she arrived, leaning against the rusted railing, looking like a statue carved from granite. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his weathered face. "I was hoping you'd reach out," he said quietly, not turning to look at her. "Tell me everything," Emily demanded, her voice stronger than she felt inside. "No more hints. No more half-truths." Silas's expression darkened as he gazed out at the gray water. "Your Uncle Richie wasn't just any member of the Iron Kings. He was rising fast, making waves. He was smart. But there was another guy, Vargas, we called him the Cobra, who didn't like being overshadowed." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm sun. "Vargas set Richie up," Silas continued, his voice rough with the friction of old pain. "Made it look like he'd betrayed the club. Like he was skimming off the top. And my mother? She knew too much. She was there the night everything went wrong. She saw Vargas pull the trigger. That's why she ran." "And this Vargas," Emily whispered, the name tasting like ash. "He's still out there?" Silas turned to face her, his eyes intense and burning. "He's more than out there. He's back in town, and he's got unfinished business. Those men who've been following me, the ones watching you. They're his enforcer squad." Emily felt the blood drain from her face as the puzzle pieces clicked into a horrifying picture. The strange black sedan she'd noticed trailing her, the shadowy figures outside the cafe. It wasn't paranoia, it was hunting. "I can protect you," Silas said firmly. "Both you and Martha. But you have to trust me. You have to let me in." Emily gripped the railing, her knuckles white, her mother's warnings warred with Silas's sincerity. Could she trust him, knowing he was part of the world that had gotten her uncle killed? Or was Martha right? Should she run as far as she could? She returned to work, but the safety of routine was gone. Her phone buzzed on the counter, displaying an unknown number. Her stomach clenched as she answered. Nothing but heavy, raspy breathing came through the line, followed by a sharp click. 3 calls like this had come in since morning. She tried to focus on serving lattes, but her hands trembled. During her break, she checked her phone again. A new text message waited. "Your uncle thought he was untouchable, too. Look what happened to him." Emily's breath caught in her throat, triggering a wave of panic. She deleted the message, but another one arrived moments later. "The Cobra never forgets." "Hey, you okay?" her coworker Jenny asked, noticing Emily's pale face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just not feeling great," Emily managed, tucking her phone away. She couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? When closing time finally came, Emily practically ran to her car, constantly checking over her shoulder for footsteps. At home, she double-checked all the locks and drew the heavy curtains tight. Her phone buzzed again. "Pretty apartment. Blue curtains look nice from the street." Emily's hands shook uncontrollably as she peeked through the fabric. The street looked empty, but someone was out there watching. She could feel eyes on her skin. 2 more messages arrived while she tried to heat up dinner. "Ask Silas about the night your uncle died. And then, or better yet, ask your mother why she really ran." Emily couldn't eat. She paced her small living room, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. Around 8 p.m., a loud knock on her door nearly stopped her heart. She grabbed a steak knife, trembling, but it was just Mrs. Higgins from next door asking for sugar. After the neighbor left, Emily noticed another text. "Time's running out. Stay away from Silas. Or else." She took a hot shower, trying to scrub the fear off her skin. The water helped a little, but when she stepped out, wrapping herself in her robe, she heard something that made her freeze. A sound from the living room. A crunch of glass. Emily grabbed her phone, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. She crept down the hallway, ready to call 911. The living room was dark, but even in the dim light, she could see the violation. Her breath caught in her throat. Everything was torn apart. The sofa cushions were slashed open, stuffing bleeding out onto the floor. Papers were scattered everywhere like confetti. Photos were knocked off the walls, glass shattering across the rug. But her laptop, TV, and other valuables sat untouched. This wasn't a robbery. This was a message. On her coffee table, sitting perfectly in the center of the chaos, someone had left a playing card. The Ace of Spades. Written across it in thick red marker were the words, "Final warning." Emily's hands trembled so hard she almost dropped her phone. She scrolled past her mother's number, past 911, and found Silas's contact. She'd been trying to handle this alone, trying to convince herself it was just intimidation. But this was a promise of violence. She snapped a photo of the card and sent it to Silas. Within seconds, her phone rang. "I'm coming over," Silas said, his voice hard with concern and fury. "Pack a bag. You're not staying there tonight." For the first time since the threats began, Emily felt a sliver of relief. She didn't know if she could trust Silas completely, but looking at her destroyed living room, she knew one thing. He was the only one who understood the monster she was up against. The basement gym of the old community center smelled of stale sweat, chalk dust, and old leather, the scent of pure determination. Emily stood on the worn blue mats, her hands raised in a defensive posture that felt less foreign than it had a week ago. Silas circled her slowly, like a wolf assessing a cub, his movements fluid despite his size. "Keep your guard up," Silas instructed, his voice gentle but firm, cutting through the hum of the ventilation system. "Remember, it's not about overpowering them. You can't outmuscle a guy like Vargas's enforcer. It's about using their momentum against them. Make them regret touching you." Emily nodded, sweat dripping down her temple as she concentrated on her stance. For the past week, they had been meeting here after hours. Silas was teaching her the basics of survival: how to break a grip, how to strike a throat, how to disappear. Her muscles ached with a deep, dull throb, but she felt stronger with each session. The paralyzing panic that had gripped her since the break-in was slowly being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Good," Silas said as Emily successfully blocked his slow-motion strike and pivoted away. "You're learning fast. You've got good instincts." He stepped back, grabbing 2 water bottles from his duffel bag. Emily noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the room, checking the exits, flicking to the high windows. He was always alert, always protective, never truly relaxing. They sat on a wooden bench against the peeling painted wall, catching their breath. Emily watched as Silas's weathered features softened, a heavy silence settling over him. Something was clearly weighing on his mind, pulling at the corners of his mouth. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice rougher than usual, scratching at the air. "Something I should have told you from the start, but I didn't know how." He rubbed his beard, a nervous gesture she had come to recognize. Emily's heart picked up speed, and not just from the exertion. "What is it?" "I wasn't just someone who knew your father," Silas said, meeting her eyes with a vulnerability that looked out of place on his scarred face. "Richard. He was my brother." The words hung in the air. "I'm your uncle," Silas whispered. The revelation hit Emily like a physical blow to the chest. She stood up, taking a few involuntary steps back, her sneakers squeaking on the mats. "What? No, that can't be true." Mom would have said something. But even as she denied it, pieces of the puzzle started falling into place with terrifying clarity. His protective nature, the way he looked at her sometimes with such profound sadness and pride, the familiar shape of his jawline that mirrored the few photos she had of her dad. "Your father, Richard, was my older brother," Silas continued, staying seated to give her space, respecting her boundaries. "We were both in the Iron Kings. But he wanted out after he met Martha. He was trying to make a clean break, for her, for you." Emily's legs felt weak, the strength draining out of them. She sank back onto the bench, staring at him. "Why didn't Mom ever tell me about you?" "She was trying to protect you," Silas explained, his voice thick with emotion. "After what happened to Richard, after the accident that wasn't an accident, she wanted to keep you as far away from that life as possible. She scrubbed the blood relation from history. He looked down at his hands. I respected her wishes. I stayed away, but when I heard Vargas was asking questions about you, I couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. Vargas? Emily asked, the name sending a fresh chill down her spine. We need to talk about your father, Silas said, standing up and offering her a hand. But not here. Will you come with me? 20 minutes later, they stood in front of a simple, weathered headstone in the local cemetery. The name Richard Thomas was carved into the granite, along with dates that made Emily's heart ache. He had only been 32 when he died. Your dad was the best of us, Silas said softly, placing a large hand on the cold stone. He saw a way out. A chance at a real life with your mom. But leaving a gang like the Iron Kings, he shook his head. There was unfinished business. A debt that some people thought wasn't settled. Emily hugged herself against the evening chill, staring at her father's name. What kind of debt? Money, territory, respect. All of it tied up with Vargas, who was rising through the ranks back then. Silas's voice grew heavy with the weight of memory. Richard thought he could reason with them. He wanted to make peace. He was always the diplomatic one. He paused, his hand tightening on the headstone until his knuckles turned white. That's what got him killed. Emily's new burner phone, a small, basic model Silas had given her for emergencies, only buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, checking the screen. It was a text from Martha. But it wasn't a normal check-in. Red truck, 3 times past the cafe. Stay inside. Emily looked up at Silas, fear spiking in her chest. Through the cemetery gates, on the distant road, she spotted the vehicle Martha mentioned, a battered red pickup truck crawling past like a predator searching for prey. Her hands trembled slightly as she shoved the phone back into her pocket, trying to appear casual while keeping track of her surroundings, just as Silas had taught her. Head up, eyes moving, she whispered to herself, repeating his mantra. Be aware without looking afraid. Emily's fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned the color of old bone. She was driving home from her shift at the grindhouse, the setting sun painting the western sky in bruised shades of deep purple and angry orange. Shadows stretched across the asphalt like grasping fingers. Today, she had insisted on driving herself. Despite Martha's pleading and Silas's stoic disapproval, Emily needed a taste of her old life, a slice of independence. She couldn't live wrapped in cotton wool forever. But as she checked her rearview mirror, that taste of freedom turned to ash. A massive black SUV appeared behind her, staying uncomfortably close. It wasn't just tailing her, it was hunting her. Emily's heart quickened, hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she remembered Silas's lectures about situational awareness. She took a sharp right turn onto a quieter road, then another, watching with mounting panic as the SUV mirrored her every movement with terrifying precision. Stay calm, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Just like Silas taught you. Don't let them box you in. Suddenly, the SUV accelerated, its engine growling like a beast. It pulled alongside her compact car, looming over her like a dark monolith. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she glimpsed the driver through the tinted glass, a man with cold, dead eyes and a twisted smile that promised pain. Without warning, he jerked his wheel toward her. Emily reacted on pure instinct. She swerved hard to the right, her tires squealing in protest against the pavement. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. She fought the steering wheel, her car fishtailing dangerously before regaining traction. The SUV lunged again, coming at her faster, harder. Adrenaline flooded her system. She yanked the wheel, barely missing the bumper of a parked car as she skidded onto a side street that led toward the industrial district. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled for the emergency burner phone Silas had given her. The SUV had momentarily disappeared behind a row of warehouses, but the message was clear. They weren't just watching anymore. They were escalating. Silas, she gasped when he answered, her voice cracking with terror. They just tried to run me off the road. Where are you? His voice was tight, immediate, stripped of all calm. Near the Rusty Nail Bar. I got away. But. Stay there. Park in the light. I'm 5 minutes out. Emily screeched into the gravel parking lot of the Rusty Nail, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. Through the bar's grimy windows, she could see neon signs buzzing and several rough-looking men watching her arrival. Something about their stares made her skin crawl. She sat there, locked in her car, for what felt like an eternity. When the distinctive, Thunderous roar of engine echoed down the street minutes later. Emily nearly sobbed with relief. Silas's massive motorcycle tore into the lot, kicking up a cloud of dust, but as she stepped out of her car, her legs shaking, 3 men emerged from the shadows of the bar's entrance. Their expressions were predatory, their movements loose and dangerous. "Well, look who it is," one of them called out, his voice slurred with cheap whiskey but heavy with malice. Little Emily, all grown up. Emily froze. These men knew her name. The tallest one, wearing a dirty denim vest covered in patches, moved closer, invading her space. "Your daddy would be real disappointed," he sneered, his breath reeking of stale tobacco, "seeing you running around with his killer brother." Before Emily could process the venom in his words, the man lunged forward, his hand shooting out to grab her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh like talons, bruising the skin as he tried to yank her closer. "Let her go." Silas's voice cut through the tension like a razor blade. He stepped between them, breaking the man's grip on Emily's arm with a sharp, calculated chop. "This ain't your business anymore, Silas," another man spat, circling to the left. "You lost that right when you turned your back on the gang." "Emily is my business," Silas growled, pushing her behind him protectively. His body became a shield, a wall of leather jacket and muscle between her and the threat. "And if any of you touch her again, you'll answer to me." The first man threw a sucker punch, aiming for Silas's jaw. But Silas was faster. He blocked the blow with his forearm and countered with a swift, brutal strike to the gut that sent the attacker stumbling backward, gasping for air. The other 2 men moved in, displaying an aggressive swagger fueled by numbers, but Silas stood his ground. He moved with the efficiency of an enforcer who had spent a lifetime fighting in parking lots just like this one. "Last warning," Silas said, his voice deadly calm, a stark contrast to the violence hanging in the air. "Walk away." The men hesitated, looking at their fallen friend who was wheezing on the gravel. They glanced at Silas, then at the motorcycle, calculating the odds. After a tense, suffocating moment, they backed off, dragging their companion with them. "This isn't over," one called over his shoulder as they retreated into the darkness. "The Cobra sends his regards." Emily stood trembling behind Silas, the adrenaline crash leaving her weak. She realized then that everything her mother had tried to hide, everything Silas had warned her about, was far worse than she had imagined. These men didn't just know her, they had a deep, festering history with her ancestry, and whatever blood debt had been incurred in the past was now threatening to consume her present. Emily's hands trembled as she set 3 mismatched ceramic mugs on her mother's kitchen table. Steam curled from the dark liquid, filling the air with the rich aroma of coffee that did little to mask the scent of fear clinging to her clothes. The morning sun streamed through the gingham curtains, casting long dusty beams across the worn wooden surface where both Martha and Silas sat in a heavy, uncomfortable silence. "I think it's time we all talked," Emily said, her voice steadier than she felt inside. "No more secrets. No more half-truths." Martha's fingers tightened white-knuckled around her mug. She looked smaller somehow, hunched in her chair, her eyes darting nervously between her daughter and the large man in the leather jacket sitting opposite her. The tough, controlling exterior she'd maintained for 2 decades seemed to crack under the immense pressure of the moment. "I never wanted any of this to touch you," Martha whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "After your father died, after Uncle Richie was killed, I thought if I could just keep you away from that world." Silas leaned forward, his weathered face softening with a mixture of grief and resolve. "Martha, she deserves to know everything. We can't be protective by keeping her blindfolded anymore. The shadow is already at the door." "I know that now," Martha replied, wiping furiously at her eyes. "I've spent so many years looking over my shoulder, jumping at car backfires. Every time I saw a motorcycle, every time I heard about a gang bust on the news, I'd panic. I was terrified the Iron Kings had found us." Emily reached across the table and took her mother's cold hand. "Mom, please. Tell me exactly what happened." Martha took a deep, shaky breath. "Your father. He wasn't just Silas's brother. He was the moral compass. He was trying to get out of the gang, just like Silas eventually did. But there were people, dangerous, greedy people who didn't want that cash flow to stop. Vargas," Silas added grimly. "The Cobra. He saw your father's departure as a betrayal. A weakness. The night your father died," Martha continued, her voice barely a whisper, "it wasn't an accident. And after that, I knew I had to run. I had to hide. I had to keep you safe. Emily felt her chest tighten, air struggling to fill her lungs. So all these years. The moving, the strict rules, the constant worry. It was because you knew they might come looking. I knew Vargas never forgave a debt, Martha finished. He is patient. He is calculating. I've lived with that fear every single day since you were 4 years old. Silas's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek. I should have done more back then. I should have made sure you were both safe before I left town. But I was drowning in my own grief, my own guilt over Richie and Richard. You were there when it mattered most, Emily said softly, thinking of that first terrifying night on Holloway Avenue. Martha reached out and touched Silas's arm, perhaps the first gentle contact they'd had in 20 years. I was wrong to shut you out completely, Silas. I thought distance was the answer. But maybe we're stronger together. We can face this as a family, Emily finished. The tension in the room began to ease, the heavy air lifting as years of secrets and misunderstandings finally evaporated in the light of truth. For a moment, it seemed like healing might actually be possible. Then came the knock. 3 sharp, rhythmic raps against the front door cut through the peaceful moment like gunshots. Emily felt her mother stiffen beside her, turning to stone. Silas's hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his jacket. Before any of them could react, the door swung open. A tall figure stepped into the room, his presence immediately sucking the warmth from the space. Emily recognized him instantly from the bar incident. Vargas. The Cobra. His sharp, predatory eyes fixed on her with a calculated interest. Well, he said smoothly, his voice carrying an undertone of menace that made the hair on Emily's arms stand up. Isn't this a touching family reunion? Vargas carried himself with a casual grace that was far more threatening than any aggressive swagger. His lean frame filled the doorway, and his calculating eyes swept across the room, taking in every detail before settling on Emily. Martha, he nodded, his voice smooth as silk but carrying a hidden blade. You haven't aged a day. Still hiding. Martha moved forward, positioning herself between Emily and the doorway, a lioness protecting her cub. But Silas gently pulled her back. He knew Vargas better than any of them. He knew the monster that lurked beneath that polished exterior. You're not welcome here, Silas said, his voice steady and firm. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a steely determination. Vargas smiled, but it didn't reach his cold eyes. Come now, Silas. Is that any way to greet an old friend? An old brother? He took another step into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Emily, Vargas said, turning his attention to her. I have a business proposition for you. One that could solve all your family's problems. He spoke the last word with particular emphasis. She's not interested, Silas growled, moving to stand between Emily and Vargas. Whatever game you're playing, leave her out of it. This isn't a game, old friend. Vargas's pleasant facade cracked slightly, revealing the steel beneath. The girl's father left some unfinished business. Debts that need settling. Blood debts. I'm simply offering her a chance to make things right. The only debt here, Silas said, taking a threatening step forward, is the one you owe my brother. And we both know what really happened that night. Vargas's expression hardened. Careful, Silas. Some stories are better left untold. His hand moved slightly toward his waist, and Emily caught a glimpse of something metallic. The tension in the room was suffocating. Emily could feel her heart pounding in her throat. Last warning, Silas said softly. Walk away. Emily is not part of our world, and she never will be. For a long moment, Vargas stood perfectly still, his eyes locked with Silas's. Then, surprisingly, he smiled again. You always were stubborn. But remember this. Everyone has a choice to make. Even Emily. He opened the door and stepped out into the night, leaving behind a heavy, trembling silence. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of Silas's workshop as Emily paced back and forth. Maps and old photographs were spread across a workbench. The old warehouse, Silas said, pointing to a spot on the map. That's where Vargas and his crew still meet. It hasn't changed in 20 years. Are you sure this is the only way? Emily asked. As long as they think they have power over us, they'll never stop. We need to show them we're not afraid anymore. They spent the next hour going over the plan. Emily felt the weight of what they were about to do settle over them like a lead blanket. She thought about her mother, probably at work right now, unaware of their plans. As they walked toward Silas's truck to leave, a shadow moved at the edge of the workshop. Before Emily could shout a warning, 3 men emerged from behind the parked cars. Enforcer squad. Silas immediately pushed Emily behind him, but 2 more men appeared from the other direction. They were surrounded. Quite the gathering you're planning, one of the men sneered. The first punch came without warning. A quick jab aimed at Silas's face. He blocked it, but another attacker moved in from the side. Emily saw the glint of a knife. "Silas," she screamed. Silas fought with the ferocity of a cornered bear, but there were too many of them. The knife flashed, and Silas grunted, stumbling back as a dark stain of blood bloomed on his side. Without thinking, Emily stepped forward, executing the move Silas had drilled into her. Her elbow connected with the armed man's solar plexus, sending him stumbling backward. She spun around, using her momentum to knock the weapon from his hand. "Get in the car," Silas roared, clutching his side. Emily scrambled into the driver's seat, her hands trembling as she helped Silas in. He was bleeding heavily, his breathing labored. She floored the gas, tires screeching as they sped away from the ambush, leaving the gang members in the dust. "You need a hospital," Emily cried, glancing at the blood soaking through his shirt. "No hospitals," Silas managed through gritted teeth. "They'll be watching those. Just drive." The tires of Emily's car crunched over the gravel driveway of the secluded cabin near Lake Blackwood, a relic from a past she was just beginning to understand. The drive had been a blur of adrenaline and fear, Silas's blood seeping through the makeshift bandage of her hoodie pressed against his side. Martha was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her face pale in the moonlight. When she saw the car, she didn't freeze, she moved. The hesitation that had defined her for decades evaporated. She rushed down the steps, pulling open the passenger door before the engine had even died. "Get him inside," Martha commanded, her voice steady. "I have the first aid kit from the bathroom. The real one." For the next 2 hours, the cabin became a triage unit. Emily watched in awe as her mother worked with surprising efficiency, cleaning and stitching the knife wound on Silas's flank. It wasn't deep enough to be fatal, but it was nasty. "You're lucky, old man," Martha muttered, her hands steady despite the blood. 2 inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Silas gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. "Takes more than a gang of punks to take me down, Martha. You know that." "I know," she whispered, taping the gauze. "I know." Emily sat in the corner, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the 2 people who had shaped her existence finally existing in the same orbit without crashing. The fear of the shadow that had haunted them was still there, but it felt smaller now, displaced by the sheer volume of their shared will to survive. Days turned into weeks at the cabin. It became a sanctuary, a fortress of healing. The panic that had ruled Emily's life began to recede, replaced by the quiet rhythms of nature and recovery. One morning, sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Emily stood at the small kitchenette, flipping French toast in a cast-iron skillet. The smell of cinnamon and maple syrup filled the small space, chasing away the lingering scent of antiseptic and old fear. Silas walked in, moving stiffly but without the cane he'd been using. He wore a flannel shirt instead of his leather jacket, looking less like an enforcer and more like the uncle he was. "Thought we might need these," he said, placing a paper bag on the table. "Bagels." Drove into town to get them. Martha looked up from her coffee, her eyes widening. "You shouldn't be driving yet." "I'm fine, Martha." Silas smirked, a ghost of the young biker he used to be. "Besides, I needed to stretch my legs. And check the perimeter." Always protective, Martha shook her head, but there was a smile playing on her lips. "Just like Richard. He always overbought breakfast, too." Emily brought the platter of French toast to the table. "Coffee's ready." They sat down, the 3 of them a fractured mosaic finally pieced back together. Emily looked at her mother, then at Silas. The tension that had suffocated them for 20 years was gone, replaced by an easy, comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," Silas said, breaking a piece of bagel. "Now that Vargas has backed off and he has, I made a call to some old contacts. The Iron Kings consider the debt settled after the ambush failed. Maybe it's time I moved on. Give you 2 your lives back. Emily's fork clattered onto her plate. What? No. You can't leave. She's right, Martha said, her voice firm. She reached across the table and covered Silas's scarred hand with her own. Your family, Silas. We've lost too much time to fear and secrets. You're not going anywhere. I don't need a bodyguard anymore, Emily added, meeting his eyes. But I do need my uncle. I need to know my ancestry. Silas looked down, blinking rapidly, his tough exterior crumbling for just a moment. I found a place. An old garage on the edge of town. The owner is retiring. Figured I could fix cars. Honest work. The one with the red doors? Emily smiled. That's perfect. We'll help you set it up, Martha promised. A month later, Emily stood on the grassy hill of the cemetery, the morning breeze tangling her hair. The air smelled of rain and freshly cut grass. She wasn't alone. Silas stood on her right, Martha on her left. They were visiting Richard. He would have been proud of you, Silas said, his voice rough as gravel. The way you handled yourself. You have his spirit. And his stubbornness. Emily traced the letters on the cold granite. I used to feel so incomplete standing here. Like I was mourning a stranger. But now. She looked at Silas, then at her mother. Now I feel like I know him. Because I have you. Your father's greatest legacy wasn't the blood he shed trying to get out, Martha said softly, wrapping an arm around Emily. It was the family he left behind to watch over you. He knew Silas would always be there, even from the shadows. Emily pulled out her phone and looked at a photo she had taken that morning at breakfast. The 3 of them, laughing, the sun shining on their faces. It was a stark contrast to the dark, grainy photo of the biker rally she had found weeks ago. That was the past, full of danger and secrets. This was the future. I'm ready, Emily said, turning away from the grave. To go home. Let's go. Silas nodded, the keys to his truck jingling in his pocket. As they walked back to the car, leaving the footsteps of the past behind them, Emily realized she wasn't just walking away from fear. She was walking towards something she had searched for her entire life without knowing it. She wasn't just the girl who needed protecting anymore. She was a daughter, a niece, a survivor. She was a Moreno. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what that meant.